Hi, I'm Liv, and this is how I made a pretty cool candle holder for my taper candles that I got thrifting. I feel like these are not cheap. They're 16 inches tall, and they are just beautiful. But the diameter is pretty small. I don't have a candle holder that fits them. So what do? Order one on the internet? Of course not. I rolled up my sleeves and made one. I've drawn up a plan here to cut wedges out of wood with a curved edge, 5 of them, and stack them in kind of an ascending stair-like order so that each candle would be a different height. I got started making a template for my wood wedges on a piece of cardstock paper, created a triangle, and then rounded the top off with my compass. Each was going to be the same size, so I only needed to make one. I headed outside to the open air where I could fling sawdust all over the place without any care. I traced my wedge template onto a 3/4 inch board 5 times and cut the pieces out with my jigsaw. Cutting 3/4 inch board with my jigsaw was not my favorite activity, and eventually, after much painstaking vibration, all 5 pieces were cut out. I gave things a good sand to make sure all of my edges were smooth. So I got these. I found these 3/8 of an inch brass nuts at the hardware store, and the candle actually fits in here. And then I'm gonna sink holes into them with my new Forstner bit set. That I'm very excited about. So basically what I need to figure out is how this is going to go. I need to sink the holes before I glue it. It's just gonna be a lot easier to drill into this. This took a little bit of noodling around. Figure out how far over this is going to be so I can figure out where the hole is going to be. So before I figured out where each hole was going to sit, I had to come up with a formula to make sure that I glued each piece together the same way. Yeah, an inch seems good. I decided to do a 1 inch overlap from the edge at the top, which would descend down to 1 1/4 inch from the bottom. I marked on each one where the overlap would be. And then we're gonna figure out where to place our holes, which went not necessarily according to plan, but we'll get to that in a minute. The original holes that I had drawn at the beginning didn't take into account the glue space. So I initially had this guide drawn for myself, but that's not gonna work because with that, it had my first hole here and there's not enough space for that. So to mark out my holes, I found the center of the remaining wood that would be showing after I glued the step on top. Remember our glue line, there's the rest of the wedge that will be open, and I found the center of that. I marked out evenly spaced points on my template. 1 inch down from there, and 1 inch down from there. I poked holes in these points so that I could just go through them and mark them on the wood. So if we line this up here, this would be our last hole, and that works out just fine. I used the Forstner bit to create holes in the wood that I could sink the brass nuts into. A wildly satisfying activity, I might add. The Forstner bit, by the way, is a round shovel-like piece for your drill that will create a perfectly round circle. Favorite new tool, hands down. Wood glue went into the holes and the brass nuts followed. Once that was dry, I used wood filler to fill in the extra space since my brass nuts were hexagonal and my circles were circular. This would allow the brass to appear flush with the wood. Before the sun went down, I used wood glue and clamps to attach the first and second step and the third and fourth step and called it a night.
Obviously, it was getting pretty dark last night and I had to stop filming. This is how far I got. I basically glued 2 pieces at a time together, so it's just easier. But my wood filler is dry now, so I'm gonna go ahead and sand this before assembling because I think it's just gonna be easier.
I went in with my orbital sander and removed the excess wood filler. I decided that a second coat of wood filler would make things look super sleek.
Like every time I do wood filler, it takes 2 passes to get it to not look cracked.
Then I made things difficult for myself. I decided I was going to edge band.
I want to paint the edges a different color than the top. I have this avocado green color that I got for free on the street. I love free things on the street. And then I have this like intense chartreuse color that I might need to just chill out a little bit. I might add a little bit of darker green. I know that I won't be able to get rid of this texture. You'll still see the paint on it. And so I was gonna do my edge banding on that. You all have seen me use this before.
I used these in one of my very first videos, which was a yarn circle wall hanging project. But I also utilize these for the traditional purpose in my pantry makeover. The idea is that this pliable trim adheres to wood via an iron, which heats up the glue and makes it stick. It hides raw wood grain edges and makes things look more sleek and finished. It's best not to have the iron too hot or else the glue will take too long to cool down and you will have to hold it in place for quite some time. The lower temperature setting will make things go much quicker.
I've been finding that it's easier to iron it and then hold it down instead of continuing to iron it because then it just sort of stays hot and doesn't dry. And then once you have your kind of like steady thing there, come in and pull it over here.
I wrapped the first wood wedge all in one go. But after a bit of experimentation, I found it easiest to cut the edge banding at each turn.
Get like a nice flush situation by ending it at the corner and then starting new, and that gives me actually a much nicer corner. This is with it where I cut it, and this was the first one I did where I just rounded the corner, and I think this looks a lot nicer, much more clean. Luckily this is the bottom one, so we're good.
This entire process was somewhat time consuming, but totally worth it in the end. I sanded down my second layer of wood filler, and by now things were looking nice and flush.
My calculation for how far apart each handle is got off somehow. As you can kind of see here, so it's like very close together, and then there's this weird giant gap, and I don't know where I went wrong.
But that was completely my own fault and not the fault of my measurements. And proceeded to use the guide incorrectly by marking the lowest hole.
So that's gonna be our first hole.
On my first second step and the second lowest hole on my third step. I realized none of this because that first wedge was just a little bit shorter than everything else. This is because a piece chipped off while cutting.
This one's shorter. This is just much shorter. My weird one that got messed up, but we're going through with it anyway. I think it's gonna be fine, but the calculation is a little bit different.
Thinking I could hide it at the bottom of the stack, which I think I successfully could have done if I had been paying attention. I started sinking all of my holes with the Forstner bit. Then it was too late. And I think that's where I went wrong. So pay attention. And don't be like me. It was finally time to glue all of the pieces together in one big stack.
Hopefully a sufficient amount of time has passed to have this set. Is the vision coming to life? I'm still so upset about this not coming out perfectly, but we're gonna get over it.
I built a little kickstand for my steps.
I have this brass tubing that I use for jewelry making, but you can find it in tons of stores. Just doing a quick sand.
I grabbed a drill bit that was the same diameter as the tubing, marked 1/2 centimeter down with painter's tape, and drilled a small hole for the tubing to rest in. Finally, it was time to paint. Feeling that my chartreuse paint sample from the hardware store was a little bit too neon, I dimmed it down a little bit with some darker green paint and got to work covering all of the face-up surfaces. The piece required several coats. When the chartreuse was dry, I taped up the edges that I didn't want to get the dark green color on and painted the sides of the steps my contrasting color, again requiring several coats. I will say, with hindsight being 2020, I should have primed. It would have just looked better. I had to put on so many coats. It just would have been better. There was a lot of back and forth with touch-ups, but eventually I got there. When completely dry, I took rubbing alcohol and a Q-tip and rubbed off any remaining paint that had dried on my brass bits. This task was a little bit time-consuming, but you gotta do what you gotta do sometimes. I uncovered the entire thing with a few coats of glossy clear coat, glued on my kickstand with E6000, and my beautiful ascending step candle holder was complete. While I may have messed up my whole placement, I'm actually really proud of this piece. I think it came out really cool, and every time I look at it, I fall in love with it again. If you also think this is super cool and super unique, please give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe for more cool projects, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye! Believe me, I did consider remaking the whole thing, and I had dreams of having time to do that, but I will just have to love it with its mistakes, which is an excellent lesson for us all.